Good afternoon and welcome to today's Friday Forum, co-sponsored with the World Affairs Council. Our program today is America as Empire. Nobody can hear? This is on. I can hear it, but can you hear now? Wendy, can you hear in the back of the room? All right, well, starting over, always just trying to catch your attention by seeing if anybody's watching but not hearing. In any case, hello. I'm Corleen Kraft, the president of the club, and just so all of you will know, this beautiful facility in which we meet has sound systems that were original. And so that's why we're hearing the rebound. And so anyway, if you'll just please raise your hands and look puzzled if you can't hear, we'll do our best. But in any case, on with the show. Today we're featuring Jim Garrison, Dr. Jim Garrison, who's going to speak about America as Empire, and it is co-sponsored today by the World Affairs Council. And sitting to my left are Marcus Simantel, who is the board host today, and Michael Carnahan, who is the Director of Programs for the World Affairs Council. Just before the speaker begins, however, I'd like to do a few of the round up the usual announcements, and would you please be good enough to turn off your noise-making devices before we get going here. Big news today. We are moving into our new space on Monday. Actually, they're moving tomorrow. You will observe that the staff looks quite put together. We had extreme makeup for them last night because they have been working their fingers to the nub. They actually look very presentable. Our new space is right across the street here on the corner of 9th and Washington, 901 Southwest Washington. It's at ground level, and it's right across the street from O'Brien Park, where Park meets 9th. No, where Park meets Washington. Any case, it's right over there. It's fabulous space. We're so excited about it, and we will have Voila catering there as well, so you can pop in, have a cup of coffee, and then go into some of our rooms. We are having a new room that they have appropriately called City Club Commons, and that's going to be our big meeting room where all of the meetings that have normally taken place in little conference rooms and bits and pieces of places will now be meeting there. That includes our Citizens Salon. I'm wrong, our Citizens Reading Group, Citizens Read. It includes our board meetings and various issue committee meetings. So we are very excited about our new space and hope you will drop in to visit. That's why we have the catering company and the little restaurant there and big commons room where you can just sit down and have human blogs instead of sitting in front of your computers making your heads get bigger. Next Friday Forum is post-election, and we will have a post-election program called Now What? The impact of the 2004 elections. So we're all waiting with bated breath for that. We'll have Bill Lunch, who is the OPB political analyst. I'm sure you're familiar with him, as well as Jeff Mapes, who's the political journalist for the Oregonian. It's going to be a special town hall forum. It will be held at the newly remodeled studio of Portland Community Media, and that's on Northeast MLK Boulevard. I don't have the address. It will be in the bulletin. You can be part of the live studio audience, but it only seats about 100 people, and it's lunch and guests only, boxed lunch, no coffee table, no seating in the back. So please make reservations early and come see what the political analysts have to say about what has transpired, if we know by then. Remember in the year 2000, we had 2 commentators, and there were no results, so it was kind of not a very fascinating program, in fact. So we hope it'll be clear. Our new Citizens Read space over here, our Citizens Read will be called, the book is by Thomas Frank, and it's called What's the Matter with Kansas? We're not in Kansas anymore, Toto. It will be on Monday, December 6th. Because of the Thanksgiving holiday, we will not be meeting in November. So Thomas Frank over here, please do reserve in advance. They always fill up, but we have a little more space for you now. In addition, we're still trying to raise money to furnish the space. Our lovely space is swell, but it gets cold on the floor this time of year, so we're trying to have enough money to buy chairs. You may have noticed that there are 5 beautiful art pieces in the back. We are having a raffle for those, $5 per ticket. When we reach the first 100 tickets, we will raffle that off, and that person will have a choice of the first of the beautiful objects, and then so on and so on. So please help us, not only help yourself with a beautiful object, but in fact help us furnish our new space. The contributions are by artists and Corey Gulbrandon, Joel Honrique, and Nancy Schmug donated the artwork. And I'm missing something, but those are the 3 artists that we have, and in any case, the details are in your bulletin. They're also online at pdxcityclub.org, as well as all of the events that we mentioned are in your bulletin and pdxcityclub.org. Also, you can get on the internet and blog, City Club blog about Friday forums, current events, whatever it is that interests you. So that's been a fun new addition. We also have our City Club voter guide in the event that you're not one of the 986,000 who has already voted, but I suspect many of you have. As you know, we are on a membership drive, and we want to be able to share the riches of the City Club with many more people. And we're making it more accessible by coming downtown. We now have our new civic space here. And Gwen Milius is a partner with Stevie and Milius Identity Management. She's a marketing and graphic design company. She's a founding co-chair of City Club's New Leaders Council, and she's been a City Club member since 1996, and she will speak to you about some of the benefits of membership.
Actually, I'd actually like to refer you to the club's website in the back table to take a look at the benefits of membership that are listed there. You know, you're going to hear that every week until we're done with our membership drive, and instead I have a special pitch for you today. You know, the elections are almost over, and if you're like me, you're approaching that with excitement and relief all mixed up. But there's something coming after the election. As you all know, the holidays are going to be bearing down on us in no time at all. And in the spirit of finding Christmas decorations in the stores before Halloween is even passed, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that today. I've got an idea to simplify your holiday shopping list for those of you who are already members. Consider City Club membership as a holiday gift to friends, colleagues, and loved ones. City Club membership requires no assembly or batteries. Unlike fruit baskets and Christmas cookies, club membership lasts all year long. Your lunch here today aside, club membership is fat and sodium free and is said by many to be a healthy portion of their civic engagement diet. Club membership is one size fits all and requires no dry cleaning. And while the club staff works very hard, no sweatshop labor goes into the creation of City Club memberships. Every dollar that you spend on club membership stays right here in this community. And while we're talking about holiday giving, let's think a little bit further forward into Valentine's Day. Nothing says I love you more than a City Club membership. Chocolate is fattening, roses dye, and while lingerie might make some things look bigger and others smaller, we all know that City Club augments brains, and big brains are very sexy. So sign your loved ones up. Forms are available at the back of the table over there with the staff, or you can check it out on pdxcityclub.org. Thanks a lot.
She's good. All right, just before we begin today, I would like to thank the corporate underwriters who make these programs possible, in part. They're McEwen Gisvold LLP, Medicos Support Services Inc., and The Standard, and we're very grateful for their support. Now I'd like to introduce James Amon Garrison Jr. He has an absolutely fascinating bio, a whole page, and I've been instructed to not bore everyone to death, but I think it's fascinating. In fact, it starts with the fact he was born in the Sichuan province in China. He went on to receive a BA magna cum laude in world history from Santa Clara University, later a double MTS in Christology and history of religion from Harvard Divinity School, and a Ph.D. in philosophical theology from Cambridge University. While he was a student at Harvard and Cambridge, he became engaged in both the anti-nuclear and the citizen diplomacy movements to reduce tensions between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, and he founded 2 organizations dealing with these issues. He served as the executive director of Esalen Institute's Soviet-American Exchange Program and founded the International Foreign Policy Association in collaboration with then Georgian President Eduard Shevardnadze and former Secretary of State George Shultz, focusing on providing humanitarian relief for children in the former Soviet Republic. In 1992, at the behest of Mikhail Gorbachev, Garrison founded and became the president of the Gorbachev Foundation, USA. These 2 organizations then set the stage for the establishment in 1995 of the State of the World Forum, a San Francisco-based nonprofit institute created to establish a global network of leaders dedicated to these principles, values, and actions necessary to guide humanity toward a more sustainable global civilization. Please help me welcome our very distinguished guest, Dr. Garrison.
Thank you, Corleen. Thank you all for coming. And I want to make a special mention to Jerry and Christiana Jones for their graciousness in arranging for several meetings here in the Portland area. And thank you all for the opportunity to address you 4 days before what I think all of us understand is the most critical election in our lifetime. Why don't we save our applause till we know who the winner is? There's a lot of bated breaths out there, not only around this country, but around the world. I spend most of my time outside the United States, and I have never in my entire life seen so many people in so many areas, whether it's Canada to the north or Europe or the Middle East or Latin America or South Asia or East Asia, all of the regions of which I've been in the last year, so acutely concerned about how we are going to vote on November 2nd. So it's not only the most critical election in our lifetime, it may be one of the most critical events that will shape the fate of the earth over the next several decades. And I would like, for a few minutes, just to step back as a historian and lay forth what I believe to be the deeper dimensions for the election that is coming up. And I think that it starts with the observation that all of us know at some level in our mind, but very few of us ever think about, and very few of us ever act upon, and it's this. The most important fact that I know of in the world today is that the United States, in our generation, has become not only the strongest nation in the world, we have become the strongest nation in the history of the world. There has never been a people at any time or in any place in all of recorded history that have aggregated unto themselves more power in more dimensions than the current generation of Americans. Being an American is not just representing democracy. Being an American is not having the opportunity to go to Walmart or go to Safeway. Being an American today is to live out the ultimate irony of America's history. We were founded 230 years ago as a haven for those seeking to escape the abuse of power, mostly in Europe. And today, we have become a nation that is wielding almost absolute power around the globe. Afghanistan and Iraq being only the latest 2 examples of the extension of the American military and political intentionality. We constitute less than 3% of the human population. We produce upwards of 45% of the entire gross domestic product of the planet. We consume 25% of all the resources produced in the world. And to give you just a brief but dramatic measure of the footprint of we Americans in the world, in the last 24 hours, the average family of 4 in East Africa consumed less than 5 gallons of water. The average family in Portland, the average family across the United States of 4 consumed over 300 gallons of water. We produce 10 times more global greenhouse emissions per capita than do the Chinese, and 20 times more than the Indians. We have an awesome footprint. We have become, without any doubt, an empire. Now let me define what empire is for those of you who may be unfamiliar with the notion or uncomfortable with the definition. An empire, according to historians, is a nation that controls at least 2 other nations, either formally through direct annexation and occupation, or informally through various instrumentalities of diplomatic, military, economic, and political influence and control. Since 1823, the United States has asserted the right through the Monroe Doctrine to influence the affairs of the entire Western Hemisphere. If you go to Canada in the north, Canada is not an empire. As someone said to me once recently when I was up there, when I was asking them whether the Canadians had a sense of manifest destiny, a man in the back raised his hand and said, "Mr. Garrison, we are perfectly content just to be good neighbors." You know, in your heart, Americans aren't content to be good neighbors. We influence our neighbors. And since 1823, we have declared our suzerainty over the Western Hemisphere. Several months ago, we went into Haiti and deposed the government democratically elected of Bertrand Aristide at gunpoint, 2 o'clock in the morning. He was taken out with his family, and he ended up in the Central African Republic. There wasn't a single voice around the world that challenged America's right to intercede in Haiti. If you take our influence in Europe, which has lived and prospered for 60 years behind the nuclear shield and the NATO alliance, if you look at the control that we have in the global South, through the instrumentalities of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, I think it is safe to say that this country controls more people in more ways than any empire in the history of the world. And the single most important fact is often completely missed in our political debate. And I think we're really fortunate in this election to at least have many of the issues very starkly put before us. Because this election is going to matter, because it's going to determine what the basic policy projections will be of this nation as we begin to assert imperial power in a way not only that we have never exerted, but the world has never seen. Time is very short, but let me just accentuate a couple very salient points about empire. There is what historians call the imperial arc, that empires rise empires hold dominion, and empires fall. There are no exceptions. Sort of like the law of gravity. What goes up comes down. The reason why this is important is because the United States has reached or has gotten very near its zenith. The only real question is how long we're going to last before we fall. For fall, we surely will. And this raises a deeper question, and that is about the durability of imperial power. Because if you analyze the rise and fall of imperial systems, you'll see that the Romans maintained imperial power for over 1,000 years. The Nazis burnt out after only 12 years. And most of the imperiums are some way stretched in between. So how you deal with the maintenance of the power that you have attained is the most important question before the imperium. And it's the most important question in your life and in my life. Because every generation of Americans, and I speak to you as a 10th generation American, my people first came here in 1686 and have fought in every war in American history. And we're part of the pioneer westward expansion. Every generation until now has built the American empire. And now we stand as a colossus astride the globe, able to exert our will wherever and however we choose. And the single most important question is, how are we going to maintain the power that 10 generations of Americans have bequeathed to us? That is what this election is about. And if you analyze the rise and fall of the imperial systems, and you pay particular attention to Rome, which lasted the longest, and in fact, Rome at her apex lasted longer than the United States has even been a country. Rome knew about governance. Rome applied the greatest genius to governance that's ever been seen in the annals of history. And what Rome understood about empire was that empire, to last long and be durable, could not rely on military force. Because the only way to maintain an equilibrium among diverse peoples was to build institutions and establish universal laws that the governed believed and experienced to be fundamentally fair. And so that their participation in the empire was part of the civilizing process that they knew that they needed for their own well-being. So Rome asserted her authority through the mastery of law and endured for a millennium in the East and over 500 years in the West. There's much more I can say about this, but I want to fast forward to recent history. Because in the book that I wrote, America as Empire, I was really grappling with how America has acted and how we should act. And I asked myself the question in the book, where are some recent examples of the Roman understanding of power? And much to my delight and surprise, it was Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman in the way they comported themselves in and through and after the Second World War. If you think about it, even as Roosevelt was fighting Imperial Japan across the Pacific and Nazi Germany across the Atlantic, he was building and designing the United Nations system that was founded in San Francisco even before the war was over. He died, as you know. Harry Truman set forth a whole series of policies established the Marshall Plan that rebuilt Japan and Europe, established the Bretton Woods institutions that founded all the international financial institutions, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the International Finance Corporation, established the NATO alliance in 1949, established a general agreement on trade and tariff that evolved into the World Trade Organization 10 years ago. If you look around the world today, almost every major institution that governs international norms and procedures was built by American presidents using the national sovereignty of the United States to do what? To build institutions that certainly embedded American military and economic and political power in its rightful place, but also built institutions that the rest of the international community could participate in and experience as fundamentally fair. One of the reasons why the world community has had such an extraordinarily negative reaction to the Bush administration is because this president, in the last 3.5 years, has withdrawn from more treaties and protocols and agreements and memorandums than any president in the history of our republic. And after 100 years, actually starting since Woodrow Wilson, if you look at the 20th century, America asserted itself as a global leader because it worked on behalf of the international community in war, triumphed over its enemies, and built all the institutions that the international community knew were needed in a world that they understood was increasingly integrating, globalizing, and becoming a singularity. And what has happened in the last 3 years has been a complete shift in the strategic intentionality of the United States. If you look at the national security document promulgated by the White House in September of 2002, it was asserting that the United States now intends to use its military force proactively, preemptively, and that no competition and not even the beginnings of competition will be tolerated in any quarter by any nation or any group of nations. And so I think we've come to a very stark choice between whether we want a leadership, as the neoconservatives have articulated over the last 3.5 years, which is seeking military superiority and the consolidation of military capacities around the world, or whether we want some kind of a global test for American power. Obviously, America is preeminent. Everybody understands that. Everybody accepts that. Everybody wants that. And in fact, some of the most interesting polling that's being done by the Pew Foundation Global Attitudinal Survey, as you may know, indicates that even in nations in the Middle East and in South Asia that have an anti-American quotient now that's over 90%, when they ask them a follow-up question, well, what nation do you want to replace the United States? By almost unanimity, they say, no, we don't want anybody to replace the United States. We want the United States to lead. But we want the United States to lead like they did before. And that's what's in play in this election. Let me close with a final observation. The ultimate irony of American power in the world, unsurpassed, unchallengeable, globally pervasive, is that right at the moment when we have become the strongest nation in history, history is moving beyond the nation state. That's what the cumulative effect of globalization is all about. And the growing disequilibrium between a strong nation state and the erosion of the nation state system is exaggerating American power even as it's undermining it. So we Americans need to understand that we live in very precarious times. There are between 20 and 30 major global challenges confronting the international community: ozone depletion, global warming, overfishing, deforestation, water scarcity, pervasive poverty, overpopulation, HIV/AIDS and other pandemics of infectious diseases, organized crime, trafficking in body parts, terrorism, international tax issues, intellectual property issues. Not a single one of these issues are being solved, because the institutions put in place 60 years ago are no longer capable of dealing with the voltage of power that's coming from our challenges. And if you look at the policymakers and hear what they're telling us, these global problems are beginning to metastasize. There's a relationship between the fact that we're not dealing with global warming and we have increasingly erratic climactic behavior and the rise of infectious diseases. There's a relationship between the fact that we're not dealing with overpopulation, we're not dealing with pervasive poverty, we're not dealing with social alienation, and we have a rise in terrorism and complete alienation against the current system. So the image I use in the book to understand the American imperium is that we are certainly a mighty fortress, absolutely. But we need to understand that we rest on shifting sand. And what we witnessed in Southeast Asia in 1997 with the collapse of the Southeast Asian markets, what we saw happen in the Soviet Union before that, where the Soviet Union quite literally disappeared over a weekend. And I happened to be the last foreigner that Mr. Gorbachev received in his private office in the Kremlin right before he lost power. So I watched it happen. We need to understand that the most fundamental law of an integrating world is the butterfly effect. You know, from chaos theory, whereby the flutter of a butterfly's wings over China, once it finishes permutation through the system, can cause a storm over Europe. Small events, hidden places, have dramatic effects in unexpected quarters. So as we go to the polls, as we choose who we want to lead us, let us understand that our generation has become the greatest of the generations. We now wield more power than even Rome around the world. We need to understand that what goes up comes down. And how you manage your power once you've attained it is the critical ingredient in the durability of power. And what history teaches us, it's not our capacity to go to the other side of the planet and destroy an enemy that counts. What counts for a durable empire is building institutions that the governed experience as fair. And finally, let us understand that there is accumulating beyond the horizon a very complicated, interactive series of global problems that if the United States does not lead the world in solving, will begin to victimize us in ways we currently can't even imagine. So history is at the balance. And how we decide next Tuesday is going to determine not only the next phase of political economy in this country, but because we now stand as a colossus astride the globe, we are going to shape the next generation of life on this earth. Thank you all.
Well, in all my years in City Club, I don't think I've ever seen a standing ovation for a speaker after his initial remarks. The fact that we can hear such a compelling and thought-provoking speaker and still have the opportunity, or I should say, and in addition have the opportunity to question him, is one of the amazing benefits of being a member of City Club. Today, City Club members as well as World Affairs Council members will be able to ask questions, but those are the only two groups that can. Our first question will come from the board host, Marcus Simantel, who is a member of the Board of Governors. He's he co-chairs, or he is part of the oversight of all of the issue committees, and he is a retired farmer and a well-known community activist. Marcus will ask the first question. Marcus?
Thank you, Dr. Garrison. When I first saw the program come out, the bulletin come out for today's program, said Jim Garrison, and wasn't there an attorney down in New Orleans with that same name? And I thought I might get to ask about the conspiracy theory of John F. Kennedy's assassination. Doctor, in chapter 2 of your book, you rather methodically go through possible competitors for the American Imperium, and you discount France, Germany, Russia, China, and India. And I'm wondering if, and you did also mention something about consumerism, which concerns me. And that's my question. America is a great consumer. You look at the civilizations of China and India, they've survived for thousands of years. We're 200 years old. They outnumber us 10 to 1. But their civilizations have been based on sustainability. And I'd like you to comment, I'd like your thoughts on how does consumerism and sustainability play into this possible lengthening of the American Imperium.
As I often say to those people who ask me if I'm the DA from New Orleans, I say that there's no relation, but I think he was right. So thank you. I do analyze in the book potential challenges to American power, and I take a minority view around China. I don't see China, for example, as a threat. Because China has lasted for 5,000 years. They're the longest continuous civilization known to humankind. And they learned many, many millennia ago that empires are not good for longevity. The Chinese never sent a fleet across the Pacific to colonize North America. They never sent armies to India or to Africa, certainly not to Europe, to colonize those countries. China has always been, as Marcus indicated, very focused on sustaining a civilized culture in the Middle Kingdom. That's what Zhongguo means. That's the name for China. It means the Middle Kingdom. And they went into Korea and Japan for a couple centuries. They even went down to Vietnam. But they never went far from their ancestral notion of what their natural boundaries were. And Taiwan has always been within that natural boundary, and as you know, so is Tibet. And I think they'll be pretty much satisfied for that. So this notion that China will become an emergent global power that will challenge the United States, we will not see it in our lifetime. I don't think we'll see it in a couple lifetimes. As to the question of consumerism, a deep impulse in American history is what George Walter Mead talks about in terms of our Hamiltonian impulse. Americans, from the time the Puritans first set foot on, American soil, have been motivated by the accumulation of wealth. We Americans have been in the pursuit of abundance as our God-given right since we started our historic pathway. We also, by the way, have three other fundamental impulses. We're also very Jeffersonian. We believe in democracy, human rights, and we're basically isolationists. We're also Wilsonian. We believe in world-changing and world in scope kinds of ideas in the spirit of President Woodrow Wilson. And finally, we're also very Jacksonian. After Andrew Jackson, the president in the 1820s, who said the only good Indian is a dead Indian. And it's us against them, it's light against darkness, and it's total victory in warfare. And so it's the interaction between these different impulses that characterize the complexity and the scope of American history. But the consumer scope is currently very much out there.
Chris Smith, club member. I'm thinking about if we're at our zenith, then the downward arc must be in front of us, even if we're going to be durable for some time. And I'm wondering what the shape of that arc is going to be. And thinking about other empires in the world's history, it's not a lot of fun to be on the downward arc. But I'm also wondering, and I'm not a historian, so I may, in racking my brain, not have this right, but I can only think of one other empire where the government was chosen through democratic institutions, and that would be the British Empire. And that their downward arc was relatively calm compared to others. They essentially surrendered their overseas possessions. Does that create an analogy for what the downward arc for the United States might look like?
Very important question, thank you. I would make two observations. First, Rome and Athens were also democratic republics as they built their imperium. And if you study Toynbee, and I get into a little bit of this in the book, but not as much as I would like to, and I'm thinking about actually doing another one on the question that Toynbee, the great British historian of the last century, asked about what comes together at the point of absolute power that begins the corruption. If you think of a fruit on a tree, it's green and it gets riper and riper and riper, and then it's perfect. And then it starts to rot. And finally it'll fall from the tree. That's the life of human beings. That's the life of empire. There's three things that come together according to Toynbee. And as you know, he studied all 23 extant civilizations known to humankind. And he said, first of all, at the point of empire, and you see this in Rome and Athens, there's a peculiar phenomenon that happens where at the level of ultimate extent, power starts to concentrate in the throne, and democracy is surrendered. Julius Caesar in Rome, if you remember that story. And so as you extend your powers beyond your boundaries, something happens internally that causes you to concentrate your power proportional to your extent of power. The second aspect is that as power gets concentrated in the throne, in an imperial presidency, as Arthur Schlesinger has called the American presidency, wealth also gets concentrated into fewer and fewer wealthier and wealthier people that surround the throne. And the middle class evaporates, and what gets created is a vast underclass that somehow has to be dealt with. Thirdly, what happens is there is the simultaneous surrender of a notion of civic virtue. Take, for example, in our country, it was the Puritan ethic that built this country. You know, early to bed, early to rise, you work hard, you go to church on Sunday, you're disciplined, you don't drink, smoke, drink, or chew. and you're very ascetic, motivated by wealth, but there was good citizenship that built this country. Well, as you concentrate power in the leader, you concentrate wealth, civic virtue is surrendered and replaced by a notion of entitlement. And the people, increasingly an underclass, begin to say to the Caesar or the president, hey, you're taking all our freedoms, you're giving all the tax breaks to the rich, you take care of us. And what happens, according to Toynbee, as money leaves the governmental system for the rich, as the middle class and therefore the Puritan ethic disappears and entitlement comes up, a crisis happens. Either an external enemy drives across the border, or an internal phenomenon like a massive outbreak of plague, or an earthquake, or massive fire, or revolt, and the system can't develop what Toynbee calls the elasticity to respond to the crisis. And it falls. Sir.
Ray Polanyi, a City Club member. It seems to me that perhaps the biggest problem that we're facing is that we have forgotten that with rights come responsibilities. It seems to me that that's at the crux of everything. We feel we are endowed with all kinds of rights, but we have forgotten that there is also tremendous responsibility that comes with it. And it seems to me that what's important is to go back to this question. What do you think?
I would observe in that after Augustus, which constitutes, by all accounts, the golden age of Rome, he was followed by a series of completely incompetent criminals, Nero, Caligula, etc. But then, beginning in 96 AD, all the way through 180 AD, there rose up a series of 5 emperors that so dedicated themselves to the proposition that you just stated, that a falling empire reconstituted itself and became, according to Toynbee, according to Durant, according to Gibbon, the great historians of modernity, became the longest period of continuous good governance in the history of the world. Our notion in American jurisprudence that you're innocent until you're proven guilty is not an American development. It's not even a British development. It was codified into Roman law by the Emperor Antonius Pius in 160 AD. He was the 4th of the 5 philosopher kings, culminating, as you may know, in Marcus Aurelius, who wrote his great Meditations. So the debate about this interface between rights and responsibilities is never over. It emerges afresh with every generation. And even if the populace is not sophisticated enough always to elect or appoint the best leaders, there was something in Rome, and I believe there's even something in the United States that's so strong in terms of our constitutional system that we will endure probably longer than we would have had we not had such an extraordinary gift of the U.S. Constitution.
Pat Rumours, City Club member. A week ago, I heard Bono speak here in Portland, and he was the first speaker in the World Affairs Council International Series. And Bono was addressing issues from his organization, DATA, debt, AIDS, trade, and Africa, and you could substitute Latin America and other parts of the world for that. Out of his deep commitment through Jubilee and trying to reach political leadership worldwide to address these 3 issues that have come together in a devastating impact in Africa. So I'm wondering, given what you've said about the need for political leadership that can address the integrative interconnectivity of these issues, what would you exhort the political leadership in the United States or globally to do to address these 3 issues? And how would you suggest we go about it differently than we have to date? Thank you.
That's a very good question, and I admire Bono for everything that he's doing. He's an extraordinary intelligence. Let me begin by saying that if you look at the last 100 years of American power, it has been built by a combination of American military triumph on the field and leading the international community in building the institutions that the community understood it needed. World War I, America prevailed. Instead of vanquishing the enemy, Woodrow Wilson said, let us embed the New World Order with democratic principles, and let us, for the first time, begin the process of building global governance, because our extent is now global. So we have to regulate globally. And that was the League of Nations. The US Senate did not ratify it. The Nazi Germans did not adhere to it. It collapsed. And so in 1939, the world again descended into a second global conflagration, the Second World War. After the Second World War, it wasn't 10 million dead, it was 50 million dead, in addition to which we'd seen the Holocaust. And again, an American president triumphed on the battlefield, but also began immediately, even before the triumph was assured, to build the next iteration of global institutions. The UN, Bretton Woods, NATO, the GATT, the major institutions that stand to this day. We're 60 years on. The institutions that were built 60 years ago are no longer capable of the kind of elasticity and creative response that they once were. The world is again looking to the United States for the same kind of leadership that it expected and received with Truman and Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. And because it is not getting it, that there is the consternation. The vision that I hold up in the book, and with which I conclude the book, is that if the United States, in the spirit of Roosevelt and the spirit of Wilson, would rise again to real Roman leadership and build what I call global governance 3.0, it will still be primitive, it will still be inexact, it will still be unsophisticated, because we're only beginning to understand sovereignty at a global level. But it'll be stronger than the UN system, even as the UN system was stronger than the League of Nations. If we would do that, we would make obsolete the need for empire. And we would go down as the final empire, who had enough of a visionary destiny to understand that in the end, our job was to midwife democracy and fair institutions for the world. Can you imagine the legacy that would be? My recommendation to the next President of the United States is not to continue to hammer the United Nations. If I was recommending an act for the next President of the United States, I would say, Mr. President, you call the United Nations to New York, and you say to them, we're not going to leave this town until we either reform this institution or we relegate it to the dustbin of history, because we will have built another one. That's what they did in San Francisco under Roosevelt and Truman. We can do it again. Right now, the International Monetary Fund says that 1/3 of all the nations in the world are bankrupt. They have so much debt, they can't even see the future. And that's only one of 20 to 30 major problems. Bono happens to be talking about it, the whole relationship between debt and failing and failed states. And where there's failing and failed states, there's terrorism, there's organized crime, there's all kinds of mean and nasty things emerge. America has a vested interest in leading the world to dealing with the third world debt issue. We should forgive most of the debt. And then we should redesign the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund so they stop perpetuating a system that cripples the countries to which they're extending loans. That's the kind of reform that we need. That's the kind of reform the world wants America to demonstrate. And that's the kind of leadership that we are not currently exercising.
Joella Whirlin, World Affairs
Excuse me
Council.
just a sec, Joellen. Joellen's may possibly be the last question. Dr. Garrison has a 2:20 plane to catch to New Mexico. And so just in case, you may be the last question.
Sorry, I almost hate to add another question. Joella Whirlin, club member, World Affairs Council member. I've never remembered an election in which religion, Christianity, has played such a huge role. A great percentage of our country believes in the literal truth of the Bible, and it is very much at the center now of dialogue about what our role in the world should be, because the American flag and Christianity have been commingled. How do you, given your background, see that a president now can deal with a population that feels so strongly in that direction? We are a democracy, so we're talking pretty close to half the people, in fact more, I think. Thank you.
Well, as the son of a conservative Baptist missionary, I have a lot to say on that particular question. And I think, Corleen, you'd have to invite me back for a whole analysis of the Christian right, which I think is highly potent, will make the critical difference in this election if they mobilize as many people as they plan to. And I think that because they subscribe to an apocalyptic theology, many of the evangelical Christians, as you all know, believe that this is the end of time. And so if there's conflagration in the Middle East, for them that's a good thing, because it means that Jesus is coming back and will snatch them up in a twinkling of an eye. Let me not analyze the Christian right, but let me make a final statement which I think is broader. I believe that what challenges the world today is not a clash of civilizations. Islam is not our enemy. Our enemy is fundamentalism. And whether it's the Christian fundamentalists in this country who believe that we are at the end of time and are motivated by an end-of-the-world theology and political practice, whether it's the fundamentalists in Israel, and right now you may know there's more assassination attempts being foiled against Sharon than even Yitzhak Rabin 10 years ago. And in the last 6 months, they've foiled 2 attempts, 2 plots to take airplanes and dive bomb into the Mosque of Omar, the Dome of the Rock, to precipitate war. They want war. And in Islam, the radical fundamentalists, the Wahhabis, the Al-Qaeda, we are in a very dangerous, interlocking dynamic of fundamentalists who want the situation to get worse, who are not motivated by any constructive vision about the world in the here and now. Anybody who believes that Jesus is coming, and I may be stepping on some toes here, but I was raised as a conservative Baptist, and I know that to the degree to which you say value is on the other side, that all we can expect here is trials and tribulations pouring out of the divine wrath of God. That is a politics that is not constructive, and it will only end in in tears for us all. And whatever we do beginning on November 3rd in terms of this rights and responsibilities question, sir, we need to understand as Americans that we have power, but we're a seething cauldron of contradictions. And I would just hope that whoever's elected president sees that his main opportunity in the next 4 years is to bring healing to a deeply divided land.
I'm sorry, he doesn't have time to stop. He has to get right to the airport, but I would suggest to you that you gather friends and you get in front of channel 30 or 14 tonight and watch this again together. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Good luck to us one and all on Tuesday.